When people think about medieval wars, they often imagine chaos, masses of soldiers colliding without order, knights charging blindly, battles decided by brute force alone. But medieval warfare was often far more calculated than we imagine. It was shaped by terrain, supply lines, psychology, and timing. And few battles demonstrate this better than the Battle of Stirling Bridge in 1297. To understand why this battle mattered so deeply, we must first understand Scotland itself. Scotland is not an easy land to conquer. Its geography is fractured, uneven, and hostile to large invading armies. Rivers cut through valleys, hills rise abruptly, wetlands and marshes dominate low ground. Movement is slow, predictable, and dangerous for outsiders. Among all these features, the River Forth stands out. The Forth stretches across central Scotland, widening and narrowing as it flows eastward. In medieval times, it was not easily crossed. For much of its length, it was surrounded by marshy ground that swallowed heavy equipment and cavalry. There were only a few places where an army could cross safely, and Stirling was the most important of them all. Stirling was not just a town, it was a gateway. To control Stirling meant controlling movement between northern and southern Scotland. Any army moving north from England had to pass through this bottleneck. This made Stirling strategically priceless, and England knew it. By the late 13th century, England was one of the most powerful kingdoms in Europe. Its king, Edward I, was experienced, ruthless, and highly disciplined in warfare. Edward had already crushed Welsh resistance through a combination of overwhelming force and systematic castle building. He understood logistics, siege warfare, and long-term occupation. When Scotland entered a succession crisis after the death of Alexander III and his heir, Edward saw an opportunity. What followed was not an ancient ethnic rivalry. It was a modern imperial move. Edward intervened in Scottish politics, positioned himself as an arbiter, and slowly imposed authority. Scottish nobles were divided. Some cooperated, others resisted. By the mid-1290s, English garrisons occupied key Scottish castles. Taxes were enforced. English officials administered the land. To many Scots, English rule felt distant, extractive, and humiliating. Resistance did not begin with kings. It began locally. One of the figures who emerged from this resistance was William Wallace. Wallace was not born into high nobility. He did not command authority through royal blood. What he had was local legitimacy, military instinct, and an intimate understanding of the land. Wallace did not fight pitched battles at first. He used ambushes, raids, hit-and-run attacks. He targeted supply lines, isolated garrisons, and symbols of English authority. This form of warfare frustrated the English deeply. It denied them decisive victories. At the same time, another leader was rising in the north, Andrew Moray. Moray was a nobleman with experience, organization, and a strategic mind. While Wallace operated largely in the south and central regions, Moray led a coordinated rebellion in the north. Together, Wallace and Moray represented something dangerous, not just rebellion, but coordination. By 1297, English control over Scotland was visibly weakening. Edward was occupied elsewhere, so command fell to his lieutenants. John de Warenne, Earl of Surrey, was tasked with restoring order. Accompanying him was Hugh de Cressingham, the English treasurer, a man deeply disliked for his role in taxation and administration. The English army assembled near Stirling was large by medieval standards. It included heavy cavalry, armored knights, trained to break enemy formations through shock. Against them stood a Scottish force that appeared inferior in every conventional sense. Fewer soldiers, light armor, mostly spearmen. But the Scots had something far more valuable: position. The River Forth separated the two armies. The only practical crossing was a narrow wooden bridge. This bridge could not support mass movement. Only a limited number of men could cross at a time. Cavalry could not charge. Formations were forced to stretch and break. Wallace and Moray positioned their troops on higher ground north of the river. From there, they had clear visibility of the crossing, and they waited. This waiting is one of the most important moments in the battle. Medieval commanders often attacked too early, eager to strike, driven by honor or impatience. Wallace and Moray did the opposite. They allowed English troops to cross slowly, deliberately watching the army divide itself. As infantry crossed the bridge, they formed up on the northern bank, but without cavalry support, without full command structure, and without retreat options. Meanwhile, English forces on the southern bank could only watch helplessly. The river became a wall. At a critical moment, Wallace gave the signal. The Scots advanced rapidly from the high ground. The English troops north of the river were caught completely off guard. They had no space to maneuver, no room to retreat, and no reinforcements. Panic spread quickly. Some English soldiers attempted to flee back across the bridge. Others were pushed off entirely. The weight of armor dragged many beneath the water. The river did not forgive mistakes. Meanwhile, Scottish spearmen closed in from multiple directions, using the terrain to compress the English force. This was not chaos, it was controlled violence. The English formation collapsed. Hugh de Cressingham was killed during the fighting, his death symbolizing the collapse of English authority. John de Warenne fled the field, abandoning the army. By the end of the battle, English losses were catastrophic. The psychological impact was enormous. A lightly armed force had destroyed a professional army. Not through luck, not through heroics, but through geography and patience. Yet victory came with tragedy. Andrew Moray was gravely wounded and later died. His loss weakened the Scottish leadership at a crucial moment. William Wallace became Guardian of Scotland, effectively leading the resistance. For a brief period, Scotland was free. Wallace led raids into northern England, disrupting supply lines and spreading fear. English authority in Scotland collapsed almost entirely, but Edward I learned from his mistakes. In 1298, he returned personally with a massive army. This time, he avoided narrow crossings and difficult terrain. At Falkirk, Wallace was forced into open ground. English longbowmen devastated Scottish formations. The contrast between Stirling Bridge and Falkirk is stark. At Stirling, geography favored the Scots. At Falkirk, it favored England. Wallace would eventually be betrayed, captured, and executed in 1305. But Stirling Bridge had already changed history. It proved that England could be beaten. It proved that Scotland's landscape was not a weakness, but a weapon. This lesson would be taken up by Robert the Bruce, who would later defeat England at Bannockburn, once again using terrain, patience, and timing. The Battle of Stirling Bridge is not just a story of national resistance. It is a lesson in power. Power is not always about numbers. It is about understanding space. In medieval warfare, and even today, geography shapes destiny. And in 1297, at a narrow bridge over a dangerous river, geography decided the fate of a nation.